day, and those many things shift and change, if we are conscious and if what we seek in the world is to become more of ourselves. So the fact that I come from the Coalition of African Lesbians does not mean that every time I speak, I have to be a lesbian because you need me to be a lesbian, ne? Because this is an LGBTI event, so therefore I need to be a lesbian. I'm a little bit random, and I'm not a very good I don't have a lot of coherence in what I say, but I have a couple of ideas that I'm going to share, and I'll leave you to make the connections between the ideas and to take what is useful and to challenge what you think needs to be challenged. So nice to see people, my goodness me, as my eyes are going, thinking, oh my gosh, there's so-and-so, there's so-and-so, it's amazing space. So thank you to the other foundation, and it's amazing to be here. And I'm sorry that I've missed the last few days because I understand that the conversation has really been building. So I was asked, so the topic, as you see it in the program, it says shaping new, and I've put new in brackets, shaping new narratives. Is this loud? Okay. And then it's, in terms of the brief, I was asked to say something about messages. What messages are we using as LGBTIQA and all the other acronyms, people, activists, and what should we be using? So I'm a feminist, and part of the kind of feminism that I'm part of is to affirm and celebrate the question, the power of the question. And so if I answer that question, I will be defeating my own politics. So my answer to what sorts of messages should we be using, my answer is a mixture of I don't know and it depends. Because I think that everyone is sitting with the answers to what messages should we be using, because we are the ones whose bodies are on the front line of the struggles that we're facing, whatever those struggles are, whether they're economic justice struggles, environmental struggles, sexual rights, whatever. We are on the front line, and the people who are on the front line are both the thinkers and the actors. So part of what society does is it splits the thinkers. They are the thinkers, they are in the universities, they are doing the research, they write, they stand up like Dawn and they speak, and then there are the actors who are invisible, who are behind the scenes and who are doing the real activism. And part of what I'm saying today is we've got to challenge that. Because as Africans, as people who are committed to the ideas of Pan-Africanism, we believe in our ability to think for ourselves. And thinking for ourselves is the opposite of what we often come into in movement. So when we come into a movement, I'm saying everything that I didn't intend saying, sorry, but anyway. So when we come into a movement, we bring ourselves, and ourselves is not just the body, right? It's our experiences, good and bad. It's the context that we've been in. We bring them into the movement, but we also find things within the movements that we enter. And then we are surrounded by other things. So we're bringing things, we find things, and we are surrounded by things. And often what we do, we're looking for a magic bullet, or we're looking for shortcuts. And I think part of the warning that we need to alert ourselves to when we talk about accelerating, acceleration doesn't necessarily mean a shortcut, because often we take shortcuts. And one shortcut is to just replicate what I hear. I come into the movement and everyone is saying, oh, we're such terrible victims, we are hated, there are hate crimes, and then what we do is we repeat what we have heard. And I think part of what I'm sort of challenging us is that we have to think for ourselves, and we have to keep asking ourselves, Whose thought is that? We ask others, hey? When they say, this is, you are un-African, unholy, immoral, insane, blah-de-blah-de-blah, we ask them, where did you get that idea from? Did you wake up and do your analysis and your thinking? How did you arrive at this position to say, I am un-African? But we also need to ask ourselves those questions. So when we are shaping or creating or articulating a message, we've actually got to ask ourselves, is that my idea? Or is it because I came into gender dynamics and Ricky was saying it anyway, so let's all say what Ricky's saying because we want to amplify our voices? So I don't know. I don't know what kind of messages we should be using. And I like not knowing, because when we say we don't know, we create enough doubt to enable us to create these new messages, these new ideas that we're looking for. So I actually don't know. Or it depends. So let me go to another thought. So just like a quick thing on narrative, and I know you did this yesterday, and I feel a little bit awkward because I wasn't here, so I don't know if I'm kind of repeating or maybe even just, being a bit too random, but when we talk about a narrative is a particular version of a set of realities, right? It's a particular version. I decide, because I have the power, I'm standing in front of you, I decide what I'm going to say. So I pull out the ideas because I want to influence you in some way, right? So the narrative is not the story and the whole reality and my whole life. It's not possible. There's always a slice or a piece of life, right? When we talk about public discourse or public narratives, they are making choices. They are making choices about what goes into the narrative about our lives, isn't it? They decide. They string a few ideas. One they heard on Sunday from the minister in church. The other they heard on the radio. And the other, their mother said that about Auntie Joyce's daughter, right? And they string those ideas into a narrative which they then articulate as our realities. And that's what we are challenging. But we are also doing that. So in countering that message or that narrative or that discourse, we have power. We're not a bunch of powerless, hopeless, helpless, ridiculous people sitting on the margins and waiting for some person to come and rescue us from America, from Washington, or from New York, God forbid, goddess forbid. We're not. We have power. We have power. We have the ability to look at our realities, to think about them, to question, to analyze, to create enough doubt, to understand as much of the picture as we want to and need to understand, and then to extract from there a narrative that we then use either to counter or to reinforce an idea that is prevalent outside there or inside here. So that's just the thing about narratives, is that, because again, it's something that often we just borrow. We walk in and we hear, this is the narrative, this is how everyone's talking, oh, we're so violated and discriminated against and whatever. And it's not saying that that's not a narrative, it's saying how full is that narrative? Can we do better? As Africans, can we develop the analysis a little bit more? Can we expand it and can we open it out? And so I think in thinking about these messages that we should have out there, I think it's really important to recognize our power and that we do not have to replicate, because often what happens in movements is we become, and I like to say, it's one of my favorite lines, by the way, we become compliant consumers of the ideas of others. Just imagine how horrible is that thought. We become compliant consumers. Somebody creates a product and then we consume it. We consume it. It's there, we consume it. But it's not our ideas. We have not done the thinking. What we are doing is replicating somebody else's idea. And so that's another piece of the power that we have. It is to create the narratives and the messages for ourselves. So earlier on, I was saying, the question was, what should the messages be? And so part of my answer is, it depends. And so I'll go into that a little bit. So we're talking about shaping new narratives. To say we're shaping, it's something deliberate, right? You don't just shape by mistake. We're conscious. We're not here to just fall into something. We don't come into movements to just suddenly find ourselves doing X, Y, Z. We are not that kind of activist. So there's something conscious, there is a deliberateness, and it demands agency. It demands agency and power, which is the opposite of what we often forced to be, which is victims. And we are victims. So this is the challenge, is working with contradiction. It's both, how do I say I'm Dawn Kavanagh and I'm a lesbian? And how do I also say, you know what, I'm actually not a lesbian and I don't care a damn about the word lesbian or what lesbians do, right? How do I work with that tension of being both of those things and working out where am I now and what is it that I'm going to foreground? So it's really important for us to think about this idea of deliberateness. And again, if we're replicating and coming into the movement with our experiences, but not being conscious of those experiences and saying, these matter. What has happened in my daily life for the last 55 years? 55, we are. That every one of those days matters. And when I come in here, if you want me to leave that outside, I'm sorry, I'm not going to come here, right? Because that is who I am, and I can only be myself. You will benefit most when I am my best self, which means I bring my experiences, my ideas, my analysis, my deliberateness. I bring it here, and I offer that to you, because this is who I am, and I'm not just a lesbian. I am not just a lesbian. I am so many things. I'm black, I'm a woman, I have relations with multiple people. I won't tell you what kind of relations. So I am more than, eh? I am, and I am more than. And that's another contradiction. And if we're going to work with contradictions, we have to think for ourselves. To quote a man, Nyerere of Tanzania, said, we can do it if we think. We can do it if we think. But how often are we thinking? How often are we thinking? And I'm not saying this in an undermining way. I hope you're getting where I'm coming from. Of course we think, but I'm not asking about those thoughts. I'm asking about deep thinking and analysis, thinking that has both think and feel in it. Because we're also taught to split the thoughts and the feelings, huh? Like Coalition of African Lesbians, you're too full of emotions. Your problem is that you're too emotional. Huh? You need to calm down. Think. Well, for us, thinking and feeling are not two different things. My best thoughts are when I find my rage and I bring up my rage, because that is what shows me what needs to happen. So when I'm saying thinking, I'm not talking about some dry kind of, these are the thinkers here and these are the feelers. I'm saying that we have to affirm the feelings that we have, and they are connected to the thoughts. So it means that there's work to be done. We have to do work. We cannot fall into a movement and repeat what the director says. The director says da-da-da-da-da, and then we all say it. There is work to be done, and the work is intellectual work, and we've got to get out of that thing of thinking that, intellectual thing is for those people. We are intellectuals. We think, and we make the connections between our realities, our thoughts and ideas, and our visions for the kind of Africa and the kind of world that we want to build. And so I think that's just another, just the consciousness and the deliberateness, and it is work. And I was asking myself, what is the work? What is this work that we need to do in order not to be a compliant consumer of the ideas of others? What is the work that needs to be done? It's actually like they're simple words. They're not academic words. I wrote here, thinking, feeling, observing, looking, watching, stopping, asking, doubting. I can't read my own writing. Imagining, creating, hey, committing. So these are simple things that we are doing all the time, and we are being challenged to do that with more deliberateness and question everything, because the best messages are going to come from that. Then another quick thought before I round up. I wondered, and it was actually while I was sitting here, and I looked again at the brief, and I thought, because it says, what are the messages that we should be using? My mother's a Christian, and there's this line in the Bible, it says, in the beginning. Huh? In the beginning. I don't know what it's about, but anyway, in the beginning. Starts like that. So I wondered, before the message, what was there? So often we land on a message, right? We come in, we bring ourselves, and then we hear the message, and then we repeat the message. But what comes before the message, and where is that work being done? Where is that work being done? The work that you can't just have a message. Huh? We can't just have a message, and then the next thing I'm articulating this thing, and I'm going there to Norway, and I'm standing there. I can't just do that. There are things that come before the message. Have we done that work? So in the beginning, there was me. There was me and my being. There was me and my living, and me and my becoming. As a feminist, that is critical. There's no conversation if I'm not bringing me, and you're not recognizing me and my being, who I am. So that's what's there. Before the message, there's you. You in all your fullness. Oh, that sounds like church serious, eh? In all the fullness. Oh, okay, there's a very happy Christian there. Okay, and there was us, and there is us. Before the message, there's us, and there's the connecting and the disconnecting, the conflicts and the competitions. That's there before the message, and we have to deal with it. The message will be the best message if we recognize in the beginning there was me and my being, and there was us and our connecting. But there's also observation and our senses and our knowing, hey? And our experiences. So there is a whole lot that happens before the message. And I know in many of the circles in my own organizations that I'm participating in on different levels, often we do jump to the message. We do. We're suddenly creating a message. But have we done the work? Have we done the thinking work? So I'm going to end with it depends. So what should the messages that we use be? So for me, and this is only my reality, you've got a different experience, you'll have a different take on what these messages will be. But for me, knowing is a big part of how I want to be in the world. And by knowing, I don't mean it's just here. I mean knowing, bringing myself in my fullest. I want to be the best possible thinker that I can be. I don't want to compete with you. I want to think my best thoughts. That's what I want for myself. I want to think my best thoughts. So knowing is absolutely critical, and it's the knowing that connects thoughts and feelings. So it depends. It depends on what? The messages that we're going to shape, that we have been shaping, if we want to change the messages, what does it depend on? So one of the questions is, what really matters? What really matters? What matters to you when you're developing that message? What is that message based on? What matters in your community? What matters in your organization? What matters in your home? It depends on what we really value. What do we attach value to, and what do we take value away from? It depends on who I am and who we are. So, are we Africans? And what is the meaning? When I say I'm an African, what does that mean? It means something. It's not just a word. It doesn't mean I was born in Africa and I live in Africa. There's a lot more meaning attached to that. So it depends. If I'm just a lesbian, then the message will be, stop killing me, stop raping me, stop the hate crimes, right? if I'm just a lesbian. So it depends who I am. So who are you? Are you just an LGBTIQ? A third question, it depends. What kind of messages? It depends on what kind of world, what kind of Africa do we want to build? Do we want to create? Do we want to be a part of? What kind of Africa do we want? Do we want an Africa for lesbians? I don't want. I'll be so bored. Like, I will be so bored. Like an Africa for lesbians. Can we please not? So what kind of Africa do we want? And for whom? Because it's very easy to see myself and all of us as a victim and say we want this Africa for us. So when we're imagining the kind of Africa that we want to create and shape and build and so on, for who is it? Is it for LGBTIQ people? Is that what we are doing? Is that the struggle? Because if all the laws change tomorrow in every single African country, let's just say they all changed, all the social conditions changed, and people said, oh my gosh, lesbians are wonderful. Please, can we have some more? You know? If they did that, would you be free? As Africans, would we be free? Of course we won't be free. We will still be in chains. So we cannot just be lesbians and LGBTIQ people. We cannot. We can't. It's crazy. It's like a mad idea that every day I wake up and what I am today is a lesbian, and I go out there and I be a lesbian. Take everything away and I will still be in chains. Why? Why? Because what? What are these factors? Okay. The daily lived realities of African people. If it's not my business, then whose business is it? It's not their struggle. We say, oh, let's not just worry about our struggles. Let's also worry about, why is poverty their struggle? Why is poverty and inequality, economic inequality, why is it their problem? Why is racism their problem? It is our problem. It is our struggle. And so I'm challenging us to say, and it's linked with these messages that we want to create, it depends on what really matters to you. What do you really value? It depends on who you are in the world, who you are becoming. It depends on what kind of human you insist on being. Because it's very easy as a victim and survivor of sexual violence, it's very easy for me to just be that victim. To just be the victim. But you know what? I will never give him the satisfaction of saying that I am his victim. I will not do that. So what is this person, this human that I want to be in the world? And I'm going to insist on being that human, not the human that they, the public, the they that they want to be. Therefore, what are the messages for them? And then the question of what kind of world and what kind of Africa are we building? Do we want to be part of? And I'm going to leave it there. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dawn. Whenever Dawn speaks, she leaves me with many, many questions. And she challenges me. She challenges my feminism. I hope you are also challenged. And you're thinking about what she's been saying. But I don't want to waste time. I want to invite Martha. Martha is an activist from Zimbabwe. She works on women's rights, basic access to basic services, and HIV-related issues. And she has been a chair of the board of GIRLS. I remember when GIRLS was being threatened all the time. We were up and down with Martha. She's the only person I remember during those worst times. Where's Chester? So Martha has always been our mother, and she has always been a very strong ally. And I think she deserves an award of being an ally in very serious times when Girls was going through hard times. So we're going to listen to Martha, and after Martha has given us her presentation, we're going to have questions and answers, and then we engage with both presentations. I hope you prepare your question. One question per person, remember? Over to you, Martha. Welcome. Thank you very much. You have to stand here.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to the Other Foundation, and as I've been saying since the beginning, thank you for allowing me into your space, and for welcoming me and making me be part of this space. I think I'm always provoked when Dawn speaks, and I like the way she, makes us squirm in our seats. But I'm also maybe even more random than she gets to be. So I'm trying to respond to. I'm not sure if I'll be able to respond very well because. What I thought she was going to present is not what really came out. But I really appreciate what she's given us. But what I'll start with is when I first came into contact with Girls, it was through an advert when they advertised for a program manager for health. That was 15, 16 years ago. I applied for the job, and I was just thinking, it's, the specifications are within the expertise that I have, so I can just apply. I didn't think about this, but the moment I went for the interview, no problem. Then I was offered the job to start in January 2003. But then the moment I was about to start the job, it was like, then, all the messaging from our former president, what a sweet way to say.
Yeah.
So then they all started hitting me, and I was thinking, did I do the right thing? Then I was thinking, okay, I will probably stay 6 months while looking for another job. I don't think with all this negativity from the president, everyone will be, and what will my relatives say? What will I... So it was all about messaging as well. So I'm just trying to emphasize how the messaging, but in the end, despite my plan at the beginning to stay 6 months, I stayed in that position for 4 years, and I've been part of that family ever since. But then fast forward, 2 years ago, my niece... My niece came. We have what we call Sarapavana. I don't know, Shona people, how do we explain in English Sarapavana? I was made Sarapavana. When her mother died, I was the one who was saying, now you are the mother of this girl. And she finished university 2 years ago. Then she came to me and said, I want to talk to you. I have, and she said, I'm different. I had no idea what she was talking about. And she kept saying, I'm different. What different? Everyone is different. She says, I'm attracted to other women. I just went short of saying, what? But I didn't say anything, but I think my reaction was very visible, even though I was silent. I think that was a very strong message, but then quickly corrected myself and said, you are still my daughter. I love you. What do you want me to do with this information? Do you want anyone else in the family to know? She said, no. I just wanted to tell you, that's all. So for me, that was a moment of, I was just trying to look at as an ally and also having all this experience and supporting families and, LGBTI identifying individuals, but still when it comes to the self, then there's a continuous working on the self, which I think Dawn was bringing out very well in in the thoughts she was sharing around how we need to continuously work on the self, making sure we challenge ourselves, we create this message, the messages that we want for ourselves first. I think that is the most important. What is the message for myself that will make me feel like I'm a, confident individual with, self-esteem, and what do I want to get out there? So there are issues of identities, expression that I heard, and what is the usefulness? And sometimes I've offended. I think I get a bit more provocative as I get more used to be part of the family. And when I sit with members of the LGBTI community in Zimbabwe, sometimes I say, so when you say you are LGBTI, but it's English. And the word we use in Zimbabwe, ngochani, is quite offensive. Maybe a bit offensive, quite offensive, depending on the person. So what word can we create for ourselves? Why do we still not have a name for ourselves for this identity? So a lot of times I think these are the things that I was also hearing from what Dawn was saying, to say, why are we going to embrace messages that can be hateful and hurtful and causing us pain? Or are we going to make sure that we create our own labels that are more affirming and make us, more, part of a citizenry that is delivering for our nations and also for myself, and being part of that make me feel useful as a citizen and make me identify as a citizen. So this is about the narratives that will be creating. The narratives, I think, need to be our own, and not getting narratives from those outside. As Dawn spoke about bringing ourselves into movements, finding things and surrounded by things, and which means that to me, already the moment she said that, I thought that's a lot of conflict there. Even though I may be identifying as LGBTI, that's a lot of conflict. That's because what I'm bringing in and my expectations as well, when I hear this, okay, there's this organization. I did a lot of counseling in girls, where new members came in to say, oh, actually I thought I was on my own until the president shouted, the former president, made a rant on TV. Then I realized, and this person has come with so much hope to say there are people who are different like me. But then I think there are bigger shocks than what they had before when they come into the space, because there are so many different, expressions, identities within that space as well. And I don't think we are prepared. And I for myself, I wasn't prepared enough to be dealing with that. I had to learn by being part of the community and try as much as I could to support someone in being part of the community. So it became, I think it's a conversation that still needs to be done. Maybe it's not a comfortable conversation, because each time you try to bring it, it's like someone needs to be this, someone needs to be that way. If you say you are trans, or if you say you are bisexual, you need to be behaving in this way. And is it correct to say that individual needs to be behaving in that way? Or are we imposing ourselves, as Dawn had said, do we impose ourselves as well the things that we are rejecting from the outside, from the public space? So, but also as we go into the public space, what are we what are we presenting ourselves as? I think Dawn brought that out very well. So working with that conflict, I think I don't have the answers as well, but just as a trying to respond, which I know I'm not making a good job of, but how do we create that, how do we actually have those conversations amongst ourselves to make sure that whatever message that I'm going out there with, it's who I am and makes for an identity that is affirming and yeah, so I think the other point that we talked, it's also about choices. The choices that we make. A lot of times, the choices made by others, or influenced by others, or made by self. But the choice that I make for myself, is it a reaction to something outside? Can we ever live without those influences in our environment and what people are saying to us, what the churches and, everyone in the community is saying to us? Can we ever live outside of that? And how do we, are we able to blend within that while also expressing ourselves and claiming our full identities? I see that as a messaging as well, but how do we express that message? So choices in expression. I've experienced a lot of learning within this space, which I always experience in any LGBTI space that I'm allowed into. And it's always a lot of learning as well. And it helps me when I meet with an individual about supporting them as they are trying to come to terms with what they are going through. It may be actually finding out, or maybe they want to come out, maybe they are just saying, okay, I'm just discovering this is who I am, what I am, and so being in this space actually helps but in many ways, how do I guard against imposing as well myself? Because now it's like in Zimbabwe, when people want a non-heterosexual counselor, they say, go to Martha. But is that not a danger in itself to say, think you have this much experience working with the community, but am I not expressing maybe it's a narrow view of the individuals that I've come across within the spaces that I have participated in. So as compliant consumers, to borrow your word, of products, how do we make sure that the product that sometimes it's inevitable that we have to consume the products, but how do we make sure that the product is a healthy product, it's not toxic? So I think I'll leave it at that question. Say, how do we, within the toxicities within ourselves, within our spaces, and also these toxicities that are outside. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martha. That was very useful. I'm going to allow questions. I'm going to allow one question here, one question here, one question this side, and one question there.
I'd like to start off by saying thank you very much to both of you. That was very, very insightful. My question is to Dawn. You mentioned, you spoke a little bit about us being compliant consumers. So my question is, how can we avoid being compliant consumers of one another in the movement while still sticking to an agenda that encompasses where we're all trying to get to, which presumably would be equality and equity?
My question's based off something that Dawn had said around questioning single narratives. And I wonder, when we start questioning single narratives, it seems that we become uncomfortable in these spaces. And so it becomes difficult to question those narratives. But in developing a new narrative, if we're not reflecting on what has happened already, if we're not bringing ourselves, as you'd said, how is it that we navigate that space? Because we've seen, even yesterday in sessions that we're trying to think about what's happening on the outside, but there's so much housekeeping to be done. And that housekeeping's tough when there's not that room to have that conversation. And this space, I think, is envisioned, as Neville said, to lead us on a particular trajectory. And that's fantastic. But when we sit in the sector, I can speak, here in the South African context, we're sitting in a sector that we don't talk in. We don't talk to one another. We don't talk about the problems that we see. The problems keep arising. And as we're trying to chart this message, a new way forward, if we're not thinking about the things that have hindered us or have hampered us in the past, how is it that we create such messages?
Auntie Martha, I think mine is about how do we deal with friendly allies who we allow into our organizing, and yet they take a different message out there by exposing our vulnerabilities and holding our identities as ransom.
Hello, I guess this is directed to Dawn. And basically, I want to ask, how do we engage the community that is besides the LGBTI community? Because you find that besides who we are as in our sexual preferences or our gender identity, rightfully so, we are still a part of a global community. And how do we engage such stakeholders so that we work in oneness and whereby we do not live in isolation?
Thank you for your questions. And I'll start with the last question because there's quite a nice little story that I can link it to in terms of the Coalition of African Lesbians, because we came out of two movements. We came out of the women's movement. We were feminists that were involved in a whole range of women's rights and there's some founding members in the room as well, so I just want to acknowledge you all. Came out of work and organizing that was encompassing all women's rights issues, but we were also in what was then the gay and lesbian movement. There was no LGBT, it was basically gay and lesbian. This is like 13, 14 years ago. And I like to tell the story. I think Danilo and others are tired of hearing it. But what we found in the women's movement was that if we ever raised sexual orientation or the rights of women who have same-sex desire or whatever language we use, lesbian issues, we were told by those in the women's movement that actually these are not like valid and real women's rights issues, or they're not priority issues. There's more important issues like basic bread and butter issues. Delinking sexuality from bread and butter, because when a young black lesbian woman in Soweto comes out and the boys on the corner know that she's a lesbian, we know that that has huge economic impacts on her. Is she going to continue to go to school? Is she going to be forced out of school? If she's forced out of school, is she going to get a decent job and have a livelihood, right? So they were making these sort of very false disconnections. There's sexual orientation there, and here's the real women's rights issues. So that was the one challenge that we had. So we had to keep on defending ourselves, and we all know what this is like, to have to keep on explaining and defending and saying who you are and why I'm like this and what this means and why this is important. And we had a similar thing in what was then the gay and lesbian movement, where the gay men did all the speaking and all the directorships and all the management positions and so on, and we made the tea and took the notes, right? And we decided that we are not doing these things. We're not leaving both of these movements, but we're going to take a step back and we're going to organize ourselves as women with same-sex desire or lesbian women, whatever. We're going to organize ourselves. We're going to develop our analysis. We're going to think for ourselves. We're going to then come into these spaces and other spaces and articulate that. And so my offering is, the problem is not ours. You know, when we talk about the public discourse and public narratives, the problem is their narratives about themselves and about the world. That's what the problem is. The problem is not now that we've got to now think about how can we say this in a way that's non-offensive. So we've got to just keep, I'm a part of my community. I come from a little township outside of Durban. I'm a part of there. I've got a house there. I go there regularly. When there's something happening in the community, I'm there. Weddings and funerals, I'm there, and I'm myself. If they can't deal with it, they will learn. They'll either learn or they'll leave, but I'm not going to leave. And so, and I know this is not easy and not everyone can do it, and sometimes it's our privilege that enables us to stay in a particular space, but that is one of the ways, and it's one of the ways that we've been doing as activists. Is I am part of the women's movement. You know what? Like, if this is not an issue for you, I'll give you time, you'll catch up. But I'm going to keep on raising this issue here. I'm going to keep on articulating it, and I'm going to invest my time in addressing this issue, in challenging it here in the women's movement, not out there. You know, so I think, and there are many answers to your question. I'm just saying from our experience, we stay. We stay. You have a problem, we can help you. We can help you with your problem. We are not going to leave here. And I am sort of oversimplifying it. Friends and allies. What was that question? I'll come back to that. And then there was a question about this idea of compliant consumers of the ideas of others, and how do we then work with the fact that those ideas are amongst the replication of other people's ideas is amongst us. So how do we then engage each other? You know, that idea of you come into a movement, you bring yourself and your story and your multiple narratives, your ways of being, you bring it in. And you're coming into something and you're finding whatever you're finding there, right? There's also things and ideas and analysis and messages and so on. And we're also surrounded by things and messages and information that sometimes is quite insertive. It's quite, I'll use this word in a very conscious way, quite penetrative, right? That is complexity. It cannot have simple solutions. We just do these 3 steps, step 1, 2, 3. That's what everyone is doing anyway. What do? A workshop. We'll have a workshop to solve this problem. You know, everything is a workshop. So everything that we do, it solves any problem and every problem. All we need to do is have a workshop. No, like, forget it. In fact, we should all just stop having workshops forever and ever. Never, ever have another workshop. You know, and the thing is, when you say that to people, people freak out. Like, what would we do if we didn't have a workshop? You know, and it goes to our understanding of how change happens. Does change happen through workshops? Like, is that the platform through which change happens? Actually not. Actually, it definitely doesn't happen there. We all know, because we know when we do the evaluations what comes out of there. People say all those nice things, they're too nice to be for real, right? Those things are too nice to be for real. So there's something about us understanding complexity and not being afraid of complexity, because that needs a conversation. As Africans, we are so good at conversations. We are conversational people. We have a deeply oral culture, right? That needs a conversation. What I am bringing, who I am bringing into the space, what I find in the space, who I find in the space. Hey? And then what I'm surrounded by that is sometimes penetrating and sometimes it's backing off. That needs conversation. And the conversation is thinking work. It's thinking work. We've got to take that seriously. And so I think there's 2 things. One that I'll just say, and I'll move to another question. The one thing is we've got to do more donor education. Because donors have their own, they've also got it depends. Donors, we have to also work out what do they value, what is really important. They like workshops, actually. If you can say, reached 500 people over a 1-year period, 6 of them were over 30, 6 of them, That's what they want. That's, for them, that's like concrete enough, and then they can trust you because they know people. And there's a lot of it is about trust, right? A lot of it is like, what can we trust you Africans to do? So there's a whole piece of work around donor advocacy, that thinking and intellectual work is valid work. It's good enough. And if I have an organization and all we do is think, can you please leave me? Because we're going to think. And there's a particular kind of thinking, and we call it at Cal, we talk about compelling ideas. There's a certain set of ideas when you work with them, it's impossible to sleep at night if you don't do something. You know those ideas? Like, once you land in that idea, you will not sleep until you do something about it. So thinking has its own power to create the kinds of action. So I think that is the one thing. And then I think it's back to us as well. It's fine to say the donors, but what do we value? Do we value? And sometimes we're very dismissive of intellectual work. You know, it's like, oh, it's like, you know, you just want to sit around and have white tablecloth conversations and in conference rooms. We're very dismissive. We're dismissive of academics amongst our midst, like, oh, you know, you just got privilege, you've got a degree, blah, blah, blah. You know, we've got to stop being anti-intellectual because we are intellectual. So it's also something about us changing what we value, what we place, what matters, and what are the things that are going to actually create the change, because it is the intellectual work. If you're doing good thinking, deep thinking, questioning, creating doubt, it is so hot and so sexy anyway, isn't it? Like, when we're really thinking and having like proper, like not these superficial, ridiculous conversations about 250 people in a room, when we have real analysis, it is sexy. It is like hot and sexy. So can we, you know, can we start attaching the right value to those that work and call it work? Thinking is work.
It is a reality that there are people who come in saying they are allies or want to be allies, but then sometimes they do damage the movement, individuals. And I relate it to the last point, which I borrowed from our Dawn around, we are consumers of products, and and then I said, how do we guard against a toxic product? Because a lot of times, these toxicities will happen, and I think more so with allies. I think as the movement has grown, my observation has been that as the movement, the LGBTI movement has grown, and there's more visibility, and there are a few allies who have popped up here and there. We have made impact. It meant some people think this is, I can have a celebrity lifestyle or something like that by being an ally, and I can get money. These people have money. Mm-hmm. They forget about those people who, the LGBTI people who are maybe living in the townships, in the villages, who really, and a lot of times, I think most of the LGBTI community that I've interacted with are actually people I've had to, in spaces where you can't even take your own car. You think I have to take this public bus, or we call them combis, what you call taxis here, so that I don't attract attention, but you really need to give support. And you hear so many real stories there to say these are the realities of a whole lot of different people. So sometimes when people go with a different narrative, with a toxic narrative out there that is damaging to the community or to individuals, they've only really scratched the surface. They haven't taken time. And people, we know in any space, people, have their own agendas. But then how do we, that's again guarding against those toxicities. How do we guard against toxicities? When I first went into girls, I know there were a whole lot of people who were against that, to say, why have you brought a heterosexual woman here? What is she doing in our space? She's going to be, or she's from the president's office. And there were lots of, There were lots of rumors, and I almost ran off because of those negative messages. While I had my fears of what my relatives would say or what the people I go to church with would say by me working at Gauss. But it took there were a lot of other things that I started learning on an individual level, and also about myself and about, so this is why I really value working on the self. But if people do not value working on the self, and if we are also not continuously assessing ourselves, and a lot of times I think we are also so reactionary. If I get a question, if I get questioned about by LGBTI community, let's say a Gauss member questions me in the beginning when people were questioning me about my motive for wanting to work for Gauss. This is an ordinary member, not a staff member, but why would I want to work for Gauss when there's so much negativity around, around Gauss, and you don't identify as LGBTI? So if I was reactionary, I wouldn't have learned anything. If I was reacting in a, and counter-attacking that member. But I had to take the people on a step-by-step basis and learn to build trust, which was not an easy, which it took years. Even today, there are still people who question me. But some people still think I draw a good salary from Gauss, even though I'm no longer, a member of the staff. I'm not on the board. A lot of the work that I do now is voluntary for the past, since 2006 to 2007, is on a voluntary basis. I don't draw anything from Gauss. But there are still people who think, why should she be? Why should she still be in this space? It means she's getting something. She can't be doing it for nothing. So I think this is where a lot of allies come in thinking, it's unfortunately our economic situation in the region does not help. And I think maybe Zimbabwe was the first one to really go down to levels of -0 in terms of the economy. And I think a lot of opportunities arose from there. But it's a very difficult question for me to answer, to say, what do we do? But I think we need to learn to be questioning in a way that people who are coming into our space, I think we should be comfortable. If you feel you want to question Martha about being in this space, I think you should feel comfortable to do so. And I shouldn't feel attacked by people wanting to understand why I'm in this space, why I want to be in this space. I think in a way that's the best way I can answer. Very difficult to answer because people have a lot of motives and different agendas.
We might also be very protective of our space, right? And become skeptical when we see people who are not part of our community. And we begin to ask questions and we begin not to trust people, right? And I think it's connected to the shaping of the new narratives. What kind of messages are we needed to develop in order to be able to connect with our allies, right? So that we can be able to achieve the change that we want to see. And also, it depends. That's what Don said. It depends what kind of an ally are we connecting to. And it also depends on what purpose, right? And so in the past 2 days, I've got some concerns, people wanting to understand how do we work with people who are non-queer, right? Because we are comfortable to be talking to ourselves. We are comfortable to be talking the language that we are used to. But I think this session requires us to develop a new language, new words that will allow us to connect with people beyond ourselves so that we can be able to achieve the change that we want to achieve. On that note, I want to thank Don. Thank you, Don. You tried to get out of this, but you did a very good job. Thank you, Martha. Thank you very much.